I'm Angela Sierra. I am one of the co-chairs of our board. I'm an attorney with the Attorney General's office and the Attorney General's designee on the board, and I will call the meeting to order. It is 1:08 p.m. And I'd like to welcome everybody today, and really glad that we're all here. I want to welcome members of the public who are attending and very interested in hearing all your views. I want to welcome all of our board members. Thank you so much for being here and all the great work that you've been doing. And I want to welcome all of our Department of Justice staff who has been so diligently assisting us in the work that we've been doing throughout this year. So welcome everybody. This morning, myself and my co-chair, Andrea Guerrero, will be leading this board to the meeting. I will be leading us through the first half of the agenda, and then I'll be turning it over to Andrea to lead us through the second half of the meeting. Our first order of business is our introductions, and I will be first turning it over to my co-chair, Andrea, to introduce herself. Then I would like to introduce the board to one of our new board members. And then from there, we will open it up so each of the board members can introduce themselves. So again, I'm Angela Sierra. I'm the designee of Attorney General Rob Bonta on the board and one of the co-chairs. Andrea, I'll turn it over to you for your introduction. I think you may be on mute. Okay, well, I think there may be, I'm not sure if Andrea may be having some technical issues, so we'll go back to her in a moment. In the meantime, I would like to welcome and introduce a new board member this afternoon. His name is Souley Diallo, and he is the designee from the California Public Defenders Association on the board. Board member Diallo is a supervising deputy public defender and a training supervisor where he administers the office's training and law clerk programs. Previously, before those posts, he had served as a deputy public defender for the Riverside County Public Defender's Office since 2006. Board member Diallo has served in his office's complex litigation unit, representing clients in the most serious and complex matters. For example, sex crimes, gang cases, homicides, and death penalty cases. He has been recognized by his office with Trial Attorney of the Year and Public Defender Awards. Board member Diallo has served a 3-year term as a commissioner on the Judicial Nominee Evaluations Commission for the State Bar of California. And he is an elected board member of the California Public Defenders Association, where he serves on the training, legislative, and racial justice committees. Board member Diallo regularly conducts presentations on gang cases, evidence, and trial topics, and he serves as a faculty member of the CPDA's Basic Trial Skills Seminar. Board member Diallo has also written several published articles on a variety of topics related to criminal law. So again, this is just an interview, an overview of the experience and expertise that board member Diallo is bringing to our board. I want to welcome you, board member Diallo, and turn it over to you if there's anything that you would like to add.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and looking forward to getting to know all of my fellow board members, and I'm very much looking forward to serving. Thank you.
Great, terrific, thank you. Really looking forward to working with you as well. Now I want to see if I'll turn it over again to my co-chair, Andrea Guerrero, and see if she's able to come on.
Yes, I've fixed my tech issues.
Terrific.
Good afternoon, everyone, and looking forward to a productive meeting. Angela will be taking care of the first half of the meeting, and I'll be taking care of the second half. Back to you, Angela.
Great, thank you, Andrea. So now I'm going to turn it over to our board members to introduce themselves. And after your introduction, please feel free to turn it over to another board member for their introduction. I will start here, board member Pastor Kreiner. I will turn it over to you for your introduction.
Good afternoon, Pastor DJ Kreiner, St. Louis Baptist Church, Fresno, California, and I am a appointee of Rob Bonta. I will now pass it to board member John.
Is he to Dr. John DeBard?
We're having issues hearing you.
So they may be on mute. Let me turn it over in the meantime. Oh, go ahead. We can hear you. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. John DeBard, Vice President of Policy and Programs at Catalyst California, and an appointee of Speaker Emeritus Anthony Brendan. And I will pass it to Board Member Kajabi.
Thank you, Board Member DeBard. My name is Lily Kajabi. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a math professor at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California, and an appointee of the Attorney General's office. I guess originally Attorney General Becerra and now reappointed by Attorney General Bonta. And I'd like to pass it to our newest member, Board Member Suli Diallo, who I know has been introduced, but now we welcome your introduction for yourself as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am an appointee of the California Public Defenders Association. Again, it's my pleasure to be here and to serve this year. And I will turn it over to Board Member Bianco.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I turned it down just in case there was feedback. And as you can see, I'm driving. Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco on behalf of Cal State Sheriff's Association. Looking forward to a good day. And Angela, if you could pass it on to the next. As you can tell, I'm driving and I have yet to look down to see, I don't know who's online. So if you could pass it to the next, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Terrific. I'll do that. I'll pass it on to Rich Randolph.
Thank you so much, Ms. Angela. Good morning or good afternoon. Rich Randolph, proud member here representing PORAC, Chief of Police, Cuesta College, San Luis Obispo. And I'd like to pass it on. Looking forward to working with all of you today. Pass on to Chief Talise.
I think he may have still be stepped out. So in the meantime, why don't I pass it to Manju Kulkarni?
Thank you, Angela. Kulkarni here, co-founder of Stop API Hate and executive director of API Equity Alliance, an appointee of Speaker Emeritus Rendon, and I will pass it on to, I believe Chauncey is on.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you. Chauncey, Catalyst California, appointee of Attorney General Rob Bonta. And I will pass it on to the next board member.
Let's see, how about we'll pass it on to Amina Kazi.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Amina Kazi, co-executive director of the Peace and Justice Law Center and an appointee of Attorney General Rob Bonta. And I will pass it on to board member Johnson.
Okay. I believe we may have everybody that is on other than Chief Talise, who noted he had to step out for a few minutes. He's the chief for the city of Beaumont and representing the Chiefs Association. But we give him an opportunity when he gets back. But am I missing any other board member that is on and has not introduced themselves?
I believe we have not heard from Ms. LaWanda Hawkins. Hello, LaWanda.
Yes, Good afternoon. This is Board Member Lawanda. I'm from Los Angeles. I represent an organization called Justice for Murdered Children, and I was appointed by former Governor Jerry Brown and reappointed by the current governor.
Terrific, thank you. And is there
I'm
anybody else?
driving.
I'm trying to look here who is on. Kendall, is that everybody at this point?
I believe so, yes.
Terrific. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. So the next item on our agenda is the approval of our June 24th, 2024 full board meeting minutes. A copy of those minutes was provided with our board materials. And why don't we give everybody a few minutes if you would like to go back and take a look at those again. And so if there's any amendments or any corrections that you feel that need to be made, we can discuss those and then move on with that item. So why don't I'll give everybody a couple minutes for that, to take a look at those minutes.
Angela, I move to adopt the minutes.
Okay, so we have a motion to adopt minutes. Do any board members have opened it for discussion? Have any corrections or amendments they would like to discuss or make to the minutes? Okay, not hearing or seeing any hands up. So we have a motion to adopt the minutes. Do we have a second?
Second. Oh, thirded even. Great.
And so we have a second, and so we'll take a roll call vote. I'll turn it over to our DOJ staff for the vote.
Hi, good afternoon. This will be a great one to get us warmed up for voting later
Yes.
in the meeting. So we'll go in a roll call vote. I'm going to try to do this in alphabetical order. Member Bianco. This is for
Yes.
approval of the minutes. Perfect.
Yes.
Member Bianco votes yes. Member Kreiner.
Yes.
Kreiner votes yes. Member Dobard.
Aye.
A yes from Dobard. Diallo.
As I was not at the meeting, I believe I will be abstaining. Is that appropriate?
Of course, yes. Member Guerrero.
Yes.
Member Hawkins.
Yes.
Member Kajabi.
Yes. Approved.
Member Kulkarni.
Yes.
Member Kazi.
Yes.
Member Randolph.
Yes.
Member Sierra.
Yes.
Member Smith,
Yes.
Member Tulis.
Yes.
I believe that is all of the board members we have on. We have a vote of yes to approve the minutes with one abstention. So the minutes are approved.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Kendall. So next on our agenda is the update by the California Department of Justice, which is going to include a presentation with respect to motions, et cetera. So let me turn it over to the Department of Justice.
Hi, good afternoon. We're going to work on getting a PowerPoint presentation pulled up for you, and then we're going to have a brief presentation on voting and motions. Hopefully it'll help us work through the agenda we have today. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to my colleague. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I am Doretha Johnson, and I'm a Deputy Attorney General 3 as a retired annuitant with the Department of Justice, and I'm currently assigned to the Civil Rights Section of the Public Rights Division. This afternoon, for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to discuss with you the handling of motions in a board meeting that's subject to the Bagley-Keene Act. The agenda, next slide. The agenda is pretty straightforward. It's short, and what we will discuss will be the introduction of motions, that is how motions are introduced, the discussion on the motion, and what can occur during the discussion or the debate. And I will also discuss how you end debate, how you cut the discussion off and move to the voting. And finally, I will discuss the voting, how voting is handled in a public meeting, and summarize the presentation, and hopefully we will have a few minutes left to entertain some questions. Next slide. What we do on these boards is garnered by the motions that are made and the votes that are taken. That's how you get to the end of what it is you are setting out to accomplish. To make a main motion, a board member other than the chair and the person who's chairing, and if you have co-chairs, it would be other than the person who's actually conducting the chairing of the meeting. They have to be recognized by the chair. And remember that this can only happen when there's no other pending business. There are certain rules that are related to the main motion. The main motion, the purpose of that is to bring business to the floor, either a proposal for consideration or you're asking the body to take a particular action. Once a motion is made, it must be seconded. It is debatable or subject to discussion. Discussion cannot take place until after the motion has been seconded. So that is the second. The second is what needs to take place in order for the chair to give that motion over to the body. And it is amendable. Any main motion that's properly made and seconded can be amended by those in attendance. And in order to pass a motion, you need to have a majority vote of those present and voting. There is no absentee ballots or absentee voting during a public meeting. You would have to have more than a majority, a simple majority, under certain circumstances. And we'll briefly discuss those circumstances. And in those instances, you would need to have a 2/3 vote. Excuse me. Excuse me. The other time that you would need to have a 2/3 vote would be if you're seeking to amend or change something that has already been adopted. If you want to reconsider an action that was previously taken. Next slide. Okay. when you are making a motion, there are certain steps to be taken. One is that the member has to be recognized by the chair. And once recognized by the chair, the member makes a motion to introduce an action item or a proposal. And in making that motion, that individual states, I move, and states what it is that he or she is seeking to do. I move that, and then you state your motion. The chair at that point would restate the motion and call for a second to the motion. A member is recognized and seconds the motion, and that second can be made by any member of the board who wishes to have the matter considered before the entire board. If the motion is seconded, the chair restates the motion again. It has been properly moved and seconded to do whatever it is that you've made a motion to do. This is done to ensure that the motion made by the member is the correctly restated before the discussion takes place. I know we've all been in a meeting where a motion has been made and someone has restated that motion, and you're thinking, I don't think that's exactly what she said or what he said. Well, if that's the case, you raise it to the attention of the chair. Or if the chair is the one who's making excuse me, making the restatement, you want to make sure it's properly made for the record. Because what you vote on is going to be what was stated. And you want to make sure that if you meant to say it is, you didn't say that it's not stated, that it is not. Those are very critical, single words, but make a difference. It is very important that the original maker of the motion carefully listens to the motion as it is repeated, each time it's repeated, to ensure that what was stated is what he or she moved. Following the restatement of the motion, the chair calls for the debate or the discussion by asking, is there any discussion? If the motion is not seconded, the chair will state again, is there a second to the motion? And if the motion is not seconded, it fails. It is not before the body and it cannot be discussed during the term of that session. If there is a second to the motion, then you move on to the discussion. But if there's not a second, then you move to the next item on the agenda. Again, remember that the second does not imply that the person who seconded the motion is in agreement with the motion. It's simply their statement that I want to see it, I want to hear it discussed, and then they'll move on. The individual who made the second is not expected. They may be expected, but they don't have to vote for that motion when it comes up for the vote. When the motion is made and seconded, the chair must again repeat it before the board and restate the motion and call for discussion. Regardless of how quickly you want to move forward, you always ask for discussion before you move to the vote after the motion's been seconded. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, stay there. The rules of debate are pretty express and simple. You only have one motion that may be considered at a time, and all remarks pertaining to the motion are addressed to the chair. Remember, do not utilize personal attacks when you're attacking the motives of why the motion was made. And each member should be allowed an opportunity to speak before a member is called on multiple times. If no one is asking to speak who has not yet spoken, then of course the chair can go back to that individual until such time as the discussion has drawn to a close. When calling for discussion, normally the chair will ask and turn to the maker of the motion to ask whether or not they want to speak in favor of the motion. And this is followed by recognition of additional members of the board, asking them if they want to speak, which they've indicated by raising their hand or otherwise being noticed by the chairman. Every member has a right, as I said, to speak on the motion unless the discussion is ended by a call to end the debate, or unless the chair has determined that no further discussion is being requested. The chair can determine the readiness of a vote when they ask, is there any further discussion? And again, as I stated, if there is no further discussion, the chair moves to the vote by turning to the staff, who is going to call roll for the vote. Next slide. I'm sorry, go back to the earlier slide. Thank you. One of the things that happens during a debate or discussion is whether or not a member, any member, wants to make a motion to change what the main motion states. This is called a subsidiary motion to amend. And in making a motion to amend, the member simply asks for recognition and moves to add or delete or substitute the wording that's in the primary motion. The chair must again ask for a second to that amendment, and they must provide for discussion on the amendment. And with respect to the amendment, discussion continues until all members agree to either end debate, which is a consensus, or a member calls for the question, calls for the previous question. If that is done, then a vote is taken on the amendment. After the vote is taken on the amendment, if the amendment passes, it is included in the main motion, and the chair goes back to the main motion, and then they discuss the motion as amended. And there may not be any discussion at that point. If there's no discussion, the chair will ask again, if there's any further discussion, then are we ready for a vote? And by consensus, if no one says that I have further questions, then the chair can say, we'll move to the vote, and we'll proceed as she did or he did on with respect to the main motion previously, by asking the staff to call the roll in order to ascertain the vote. Excuse me. At that point, you will have a motion on the floor that was amended, and you will be taking a vote on the main motion, and that will resolve the issue with regard to that motion. The main motion remains in its modified form, and it remains pending until it is dealt with. If you reject the motion to amend, excuse me, the motion to amend, then the pending motion that was on the floor will remain there as it is, worded as it was before the amendment was moved. And it will be that original motion that will be voted on. And now it is very important for you to recognize that a member's vote on the amendment does not obligate him or her to vote in a particular way on the main motion when you go back to the main motion. The member is free to vote as she or he pleases on the main motion, whether or not it is amended. You cannot amend a motion unless that person who wants to amend has been recognized duly by the chair. In brief, amendments are treated like a regular motion. You take care of it first, and then you move back to the main motion in order to determine where you are, excuse me, with respect to the matter that's before the body. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that the chair determines the readiness of the motion for a vote. And you can achieve the ending of debate by either consensus, where everyone agrees and there's no further discussion, and there's a lull, for example. The chair can immediately move after stating that they're going to move for the vote on the motion. If, on the other hand, you find that the discussion has been going on for quite a while, someone in the audience, somebody on the board may decide they want to end debate because they've had all of their questions answered. And they would do that by, again, getting the attention of the chair and making a motion to move the previous question, which would end discussion. But before you can end the discussion, you have to follow through because it is a motion. That motion has to be seconded by a member of the board. This motion is not debatable, so there's no discussion. After it's seconded, you move directly to a roll call vote taken by the staff. And because this is a vote that you're using to cut off potentially the rights of members who may want to continue to talk, you need a supermajority to pass that motion. So you need a 2/3 vote of the body to pass that motion. The chair, excuse me, once the chair has called for that vote and that vote is given, the chair will announce the vote and announce whether or not that vote has passed. If 2/3 have voted affirmatively to end the debate, then the chair returns to the main motion and begins immediately to vote on that motion. If, on the other hand, that vote failed because it did not get a 2/3 vote, then you would return to discussion, and the chair would have to continue to ask and allow discussion until it either ends then by consensus, or someone could again call for call for the question, or call for the previous question. Next slide.
I have
Yeah.
a question. Are we allowed to ask questions in between, or would you like us to wait till the end?
Well, I think we're doing fine with the time, Madam Chair. I've got 15 minutes total. So how are we? We're good to go with the question?
Yes, that sounds fine to me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you. So the 2/3, is that you said 2/3 of the board. Is that 2/3 of the entire board or 2/3 of the quorum?
2/3 of those voting.
Okay.
Not the quorum, because remember, your quorum is only, well, I don't know. You tell me, what is your quorum? Is it a majority, or did the statute set a specific quorum?
So my question would be, because the board might be a certain number, so do we need 2/3 of the total board, or do we just need 2/3 of the voting members who actually showed up for that particular meeting?
Oh, okay, but I want to clarify something you said though. You said 2/3 of the quorum. If you've got 15 members on your board, your quorum is either going to be 8, or it's going to be something that is set by the statute. So if your quorum is 8, that doesn't mean that that's all you need 2/3 of. You need 2/3 of those present and voting.
Present. Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
So that's a small difference, but it does make a difference.
You're right. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
You're
clarifying.
welcome. No problem. Any other questions on that? Okay. Okay, so remember, with regard to voting, we have to have either a majority. First of all, as was just pointed out, you have to have a quorum to do anything. And your quorum is going to be that which is set by statute, or it's going to be based on Robert's rules, which is going to be a majority of the members who have been appointed to this particular board. And then if you are voting on a matter that does not require a 2/3, you only need a simple majority to carry that particular vote. And finally, when they call the roll, it's important that the person calling the roll calls the person's name and asks them, for their vote. And when they do that, that they repeat the vote, which was happening today. When they vote, then that way, not only is the person who made the vote aware of what was said and that it was correctly called, but also the other members on the board and the public knows clearly what that vote was. And when they ask for all of the those opposed, the same way, whether or not you use nay or no, you want to find out what that vote is and then repeat it. And if anyone is not voting, then that individual would identify that non-vote as either an abstention, or they will say not voting. After that has happened, then the staff will announce the numbers in favor and the numbers against the vote, so that that is clear and that the chair can reconcile what she got or he got, who called the roll, with what they understood were there. So this is all of an accounting situation with regard to that. But it is the chair who will announce if there's a quorum present, and if whether or not the vote passed or failed. So she will state the vote was 5-4, 7 against, the vote failed, or the motion carried if it was the other way around, so that everyone is aware of that. The chair, once she announces the results of the vote, she goes on to the next agenda item, next page. Next slide. In summary, with respect to the motions, the motion must be properly made. It must be seconded. The motion can be amended. And if it's amended, an amendment can be made to the amendment. And you would follow backwards with the second amendment, which is a secondary amendment, onto the primary amendment. And you would vote on that amendment and then go back to the first amendment. And it may be because of the vote of the second amendment that your first amendment is moot. And if that is so, then you go to the main motion. And then following that, you've disposed of that motion after you've voted. Remember, you always have to vote on the main motion to dispose of it. And a motion must be disposed of either by voting on it, withdrawing it, referring it to a committee, or tabling it. That will show that it's been disposed of, and that would allow you to go to the next motion, main motion, or next item on the agenda. Next slide. Any questions? Any further questions? Okay. Oh, there's Angela.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Dorothea. This is really helpful. And I do have a question on a slide that started with Roman numeral 3. You go back to that slide. When we have, if the debate is ended by consensus, does the chair still have to call for a vote on ending the debate?
No. If it ends by consensus, that means consensus means no one objects to it.
Okay.
But if one person objects, then you have to call on it. Have someone do a call of the question. Okay, but if it's consensus, you go right to the vote.
So if the chair says, is there any objection to ending the debate? Hearing none, as consensus, and then you can move on, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, well, hearing none, and you'll have to be watching us so you can give us maybe feedback after this. But I really appreciate the presentation.
You're very welcome.
And we will do our best to implement all of this as we've outlined. So thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay. So, and is there any further updates by our Department of Justice staff?
No other updates from us. Thank you all very much.
Terrific. Okay, we will move on to our next item. Our next agenda item is our subcommittee reports. So let me turn it over to the chairs. We'll start with our Stop Data Analysis Subcommittee for their report.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks. This is Board Member Kajabi, and so I'll lead off with our Stop Data Subcommittee report. So our report out, we met on September 3rd, And our meeting was focused on an update from DOJ, carrying out further data analysis, which is really now well represented in the report. So I won't go through all aspects, but analysis of the most recent year's data. I just want to remind us all first that we're in wave 4 of RIPA data. And so any of these summaries we have really represent all law enforcement agencies across the state. So at this meeting, summary slides were provided along with the meeting materials. And those shared materials really gave us a deeper view into the experience, especially for stops of youth, so age 17 and under, and also emerging adults. So statewide, on the order of 4.7 million stops were made, and of those, over 800,000 involved youth and emerging adults, so up to age 24. So just briefly, some themes emerge in the data for youth, and they're similar in many ways to trends that we've seen in other years of RIPA data. Maybe most stark is the data demonstrating that Black youth really truly experience heavier policing in essentially every aspect, from stops to use of force and more. We see disparate use, for example, of field interview cards, and other issues related to areas the board has passed or current recommendations on. Also, the impact on Native American youth is disproportionate. We also see heavier policing for civilians with disabilities and those who are identified as transgender, for example. And let me then also share, there were some suggestions raised at the meeting for conveying information to the public, for example, conveying the life cycle of a stop, if you will. So stages of a stop that could or might not include a search, arrest, or citation, and so on. There were suggestions around de-escalation, what law enforcement may perceive as a de-escalation tactic, and also disparate use. This came up with tactics like handcuffing in that discussion. Recommendations were also made for future reports. So in brief, looking at how consent search practices have changed or not at agencies that in California that have discussed making changes in use of consent. Another recommendation was to focus especially on areas for which the board has made either past or our current recommendations to kind of track the impact of those, and possibly even a table that could summarize relevant legislation when the legislation took effect and so on. And also finally to consider data around duration of a stop. So these were forward-looking discussion items. And then finally, there was a strong recommendation that there be a data dashboard for RIPA data statewide. So some law enforcement agencies have relatively current dashboards set up, and previously there was one through DOJ. For various reasons, that one's not implemented now, but a number of folks have asked about creating one to represent the newer data as well. Thank you. That's our report out.
Great. Thank you so much. Do any board members have any questions? Board Member Kajabi? Okay. Hearing none. Well, thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much.
On to a report from the chairs of the Civilian Complaints Committee. Okay. Chauncey Smith?
Yes. If I may pivot back, I do have a question. And I'm specifically wondering what happened to the statewide data dashboard for, I think it was Open Justice, included RIPA data. I'm not 100% sure exactly what happened with the availability.
I don't know how much insight I can lend, but I will say that data is available. So folks can download, a giant a set of data values, but so that it's more accessible, so that the folks can really view that for themselves without setting up their own spreadsheets and whatnot. There was in the past a data dashboard, and I don't remember the details, but it wasn't. My understanding wasn't that specific dashboard was removed, but there were some issues in general, perhaps on the DOJ side with the computer access to those. I'm wondering if someone from DOJ can refresh your memory. So it wasn't that the board made a change or that there was a request to bring something down, and it wasn't only the RIPA data dashboard that was affected.
Yeah, is there anyone online right now from our DOJ staff that can provide a little more information on this at this point?
Yes, of course. So there were issues with the previous vendor with Open Justice, so a number of different dashboards were taken down. So right now there's not a dashboard, but do appreciate the board's recommendation that the DOJ make efforts to put another dashboard up online. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Kim.
much. I
Thank you.
and I just want to add the data that is available publicly. It's just a large data set to download. We have, I think, through 2022, and now we're in 2024, currently analyzing the 2023 data. And so there may be, so in each year's report or the data set, there's a lag relative to where we are and which data set is already uploaded. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, next, why don't we go to our post-training and recruitment subcommittee for the subcommittee report.
Hi, thank you. This is Manju Kulkarni. So I wanted to share that, as folks may remember, members of the post subcommittee back in May had attended a MOT training to review the advanced officer training on racial profiling. And as a follow-up to that, there was a second guidelines workshop that was hosted at the post headquarters last week on October 8th and 9th. 4 RIPA board members attended, along with the same group of subject matter experts and academy instructors from the workshop. At the workshop, post facilitators told participants for the first time that the guidelines that were being developed would not set standards for any existing racial and identity profiling policies or courses. And, as we've noted, these guidelines would only serve to provide instructor guidelines as a template curriculum for optional advanced officer training. So after the workshops, the board, we on the board had 3 primary concerns. And those were that specific tools and strategies for evidence-based policing be used instead of tools and strategies that give rise to bias-based policing. Also, concerns regarding the tools for local agencies to gain quote perspectives of diverse local constituency groups and experts on particular racial identity and cultural and police community relations issues in the local area. And finally, the development and dissemination of quote guidelines and quote trainings that clearly lay out a peace officer's duty during California law's prohibition, against racial and identity profiling curriculums and the instructions on race, which are outdated. And the board members, we have recommended that the underlying research and instruction materials be reviewed by academics working in the field of race and ethnic studies. Additionally, at the workshops, post informed the board that post legal staff have yet to review the MOT trainings or by extension, the legal standards within those trainings. So the board, we understand that post stated that their legal staff is not included in the development of course materials unless there is a concern that's flagged for their review. And so given that some of the training materials reflect outdated legal standards and guidelines, we think it's really prudent that post-legal staff review the legal standards in the training before certification, as well as any guidelines and materials that are promulgated in compliance with Penal Code Section 13519.4, with an intent to give those guidelines and materials the legislature's intended effect. So again, just want to make it clear that the MOT trainings have outdated legal standards regarding what are legal stops in the state of California. So that is very concerning to us on the subcommittee. And we did make that clear at this workshop. Additionally, I did want to mention that one thing that we learned and also was concerning is that officers believe that the RIPA, they don't understand that the RIPA data is collected and made available in the aggregate. And so there were concerns on the ground that officers believe that individuals, they will be held accountable for individual stops that they write into on their report. So we tried to disabuse folks of this notion, tried to make it clear that this was not in fact the case. In fact, several law enforcement officials who were at this training were pleased to know that this was not true. And so I think more information should be provided to make this clear across all law enforcement agencies in the state. So with that, I will stop.
Great. Thank you so much, Board Member Kulkarni. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the next report? Okay, hearing none, I will go back to see if we have a report from our Civilian Complaints Subcommittee. Don't know if we have any representatives from that committee to provide a report. Okay, hearing none, I will move on to the state and local racial and identity profiling policies and accountability subcommittee for their report.
Yes, this is Board Member Dobard, and I'll be providing the report out. This will be brief. The subcommittee met on September 12th. We introduced and welcomed Board Member Diallo to the subcommittee. The majority of our time was spent discussing the draft policy section after DOJ staff provided an overview. We then took public comment, and finally we discussed and amended the recommendations in the draft section. And we ultimately approved the 4 recommendations that you all read in the policy section of the full draft report that we'll be discussing today. It is worth noting that those recommendations were approved unanimously. That's it.
Terrific. Thank you, Board Member Dobard. Any questions? It looks like we have a question from Board Member Kajabi.
I just had a friendly comment. Board Member Dobard kindly reminded me of his report. I'd like to also say that we welcome Board Member Diallo to the Stop Data Committee as well, and we appreciate his participation. Thank you.
Great. Okay, and any questions or comments regarding the report out from Board Member Dobard? Okay, well, hearing none, I think we have concluded that agenda item, and now the next item is a short break. It looks like we are a little behind, so what I propose, unless I hear any objections, is that we break for 10 minutes. It is 2:01, so if we come back at 2:11, and we'll continue at that point. Okay, so we will start our break and see everybody in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone got a nice break. Was able to get up and stretch a little bit before we get the second half of the meeting started. For all board members, if you could please come back on camera. We will get started here shortly once we've just checked that we've had it, still have a quorum. Thank you. It looks like folks have been able to rejoin, and Pastor Kreiner will be giving the update for the Accountability and Complaints Subcommittee when folks are ready to begin.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready. So we'll go to the Accountability and Complaints Subcommittee report.
Okay. Hello to all, to our board, to each and every one of you, to our moderator. As Pastor Kreiner, I'll be giving our report out for our Accountability and Civilian Complaints Committee. At the Accountability and Civilian Complaint Subcommittee meeting, the subcommittee reviewed the drafts of two sections of the report, the Civilian Complaints chapter and the Accountability chapter. The civilian complaint chapter included complaint data showing the number of civilian complaints reporting law enforcement. The data is included in the chapter and based on the law enforcement agency's waived designation. Is the date. There that specific.
I think you may be cutting out a little bit.
Say that one more time.
I think you may be cutting out. Want to try once more? Let's see if that works.
One more time. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello, hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
There were other recommendations in the chapter that were based on prior recommendations that subcommittee voted to forward to the full board. One was to reaffirm the board's prior recommendations to the legislator to define civilian complaints. Another was to affirm the recommendation that law enforcement agencies accept complaints even when a complaint has not signed the advisory required by section 148.6. Finally, overall, the board reiterated its past recommendations that the legislator amend Penal Code sections 832.5 and 148.46 in accordance with the discussion above. For the accountability chapter, we reviewed the draft section on SB2. There were updates to the data, including data showing in 2003, posts closed a total of 5,194 cases. Of those cases, 5,100 were closed with no further action taken, while 65 resulted in decertification. So far, for the first 9 months of 2024, Post has resolved 2,982 cases. Of those cases, 2,811 cases resulted in no further action, and 171 cases resulted in decertification. In 2023, 85.29% of the cases closed with no further action involved retroactive cases involving events between January 1st, 2020 and July 1st, 2023. There were 6 recommendations in the accountability chapter regarding SB2, and the subcommittee unanimously approved to forward to the full board for consideration a vote. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of my report.
Great. Thank you, Pastor Kreiner. Does anybody, any board members have any questions or remarks with respect to that redact? Okay. Hearing none, I will turn this over now to co-chair Andrea Guerrero.
Thank you, Angela. So we're now going to turn to a review of the draft RIPA report, and we'll have an opportunity to review the report. Then we will hear from the public, and then we will come back and we will dive into votes on the recommendations. As part of the review, I invite you to engage with the language of the recommendations so that we can have a push and a pull, so that we can make our later discussion on the vote much more productive. I thought it would be helpful to just level set a little bit before we get into what I hope will be a robust conversation, and remind us why we're here. We're here because public safety depends on the partnership between law enforcement and the public, which depends on public trust. And our effort as part of the RIPA board is to help build that trust through greater understanding and addressing of racial identity profiling, and to do that together as a collection of stakeholders. We've already answered the question of whether racial and identity profiling exists. We have moved on to really trying to understand the when, what, where, why, how, who of racial identity profiling so that we can address it in a meaningful way. And so this year's report zooms in on youth in particular. We thought that would be helpful as a focus point. And I just wanted to share at the outset, what some of that data tells us in this report to level set for the public that's watching and listening, and for the board. So what do we know from this year's data? It's, we've had a data review, but here's some standout points: that youth who are perceived to be people of color are more likely to be stopped, searched, and subjected to force. More specifically, the majority of stops for under 17 years old are based on reasonable suspicion. I think this is an area we didn't fully appreciate before, but reasonable suspicion in this context are based on grounds that are associated most often with protective policing or proactive policing. So points for us to keep in mind: 3/4 of all loitering stops are of people under 17 years old who are perceived to be Black and Latino. 3/4. 3/4 of disturbing the peace stops are of people perceived to be Black and Latino, and 3/4 of vandalism stops are of people perceived to be Black and Latino. 2/3 of jaywalking stops or pedestrian road violation stops are of people perceived to be Black and Latino, and 2/3 of trespassing stops are of people perceived to be Black and Latino. It's also important to note that these do not result in citations or arrests at the same rates or of discovery of contraband, which raises questions about how this profiling is happening and invites us to think about what can be done to address that, which is what we've dove into in this report. And then I also wanted to just elevate the use of force, which is of particular concern, which I don't think we had visibility on before. And of particular concern is that 4 out of every 10 people perceived to be Black who are stopped under 17 are subjected to force. That is a remarkable number. And so we have the data, we have the testimony, and now we turn to, what we can do about it, and that's the subject of the report. And I'm proud to continue to be a part of this group that is engaging in the tough questions about where we're going, what we're going to do about it here in California. And as a reminder, the RIPA board's job is to receive the data, analyze the data with the support of the Department of Justice, and make recommendations to inform policymakers, law enforcement offices, and the general public. Our reports and this data are a call to action, and that's reflected in the good work of this board in the draft report with the support of DOJ. So I propose that we turn to reviewing the report. I will invite general comments about the report, and then we will go into section by section to try to stay organized and be helpful and productive for the Department of Justice staff. So with that, I will invite any general thoughts about the report, general recommendations that you might have. And we are going to start with board members. So if you are a member of the public, you'll have to wait. So I invite board members, if you have any general thoughts or recommendations. And again, if you're a member of the public, you'll have to wait to that section of the agenda. Board member Tulis.
Hi there. Thank you for that, Andrea. It's good to see you again. I just want to ask a point of clarification. Is it the presumption of this report or the assumption that if a person of color youth is stopped and they're not given a citation, that that's a bad thing or a better thing? You hit on it, but I'm not understanding why it's mentioned specifically that if they're stopped for trespassing, they're given less citations than a white counterpart. And what is DOJ's position on that?
Yeah, I don't think we're taking a position on it. The data is informing the conversation and the policy that policymakers would take up. I think our job is to point out where there are discrepancies, where there are disparities, and that's what the data has pointed out.
So it's just a data point.
I was just stating what the data states.
Thank you.
Chief Randolph.
Thank you, Andrea. Good to see you again. I'm glad to see everyone. I just had some questions and mentioned that some key points that you brought up. We had talked about profiling, and I know we had talked about when it comes to the youth, we in DOJ, maybe you could clarify for me, were we able to determine what calls for service were actually calls for service which generated the contact, or was it officer initiated? Because when we talk about profiling, and we're throwing that out, and because you said you were very alarmed by that, that was number one. Number two is the use of force. 4 out of 10. Where's that number rounded off at? And did those uses of force result in an arrest where a juvenile was taken into custody and removed from where they were?
So DOJ, if you're wanting to respond, I know these are in response to my statements. Again, I was just reiterating the data that states that 3/4 of people perceived to be Black and Latino under 17 are subject to loitering stops, disturbing the peace stops, vandalism stops, so on and so forth. I'm just reflecting what's in the report, the data, without stating any more than what's in there, and also with regard to the use of force data. That's all in the report. That's the data that law enforcement itself has given to the Department of Justice and that we are digesting. And so I didn't bring it up because it's a point of conversation so much as I was just trying to level set for the public and the board members who may not have had a chance to digest all of the information. So it's just a level set. I welcome any specific recommendations that you might have that are for the Department of Justice in this report, and we'll get into the section by section. But if there are any structural issues or recurring issues, I have a few suggestions. But if you have suggestions, Angela.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. Going back to the use of force, what I very much appreciated in the report that was very helpful was how the data was broken out by types of force, because I think that's something that is very illuminating. And again, there may be additional questions, as Chief Randolph was noting, is what were the outcomes of the use of force, of what happened after. But I think as a starting point for the board to be able to present to the public and policymakers, really being very specific about what is meant by use of force and what the numbers look like with respect to types of use of force. So I think I think we're being very, very helpful here in that section. And I also think that both, the results, whether or not, if more youth of color are being stopped and not given a citation, like what does that mean? I think there can be suggestions, that can be suggestive of almost a parallel to being searched but not finding contraband. But there may be other suggestions based on that data that I think when looking at our recommendations, those will be topics that will be very important to stakeholders and subject matter experts to continue looking at, as well as for our board to continue looking at. And I thought also the area of duration of stops was very interesting as to why some stops are taking much longer than others. And it seems like it's breaking down along racial. There are disparities on racial lines. And I think that will be another area. I'm glad that we are noting it. And I don't know if we yet have enough information to really be able to draw complete conclusions about that. But it does seem like something that should be further explored. And I think this type of information is really going to help further subject matter experts to continue looking at this. And the last thing I wanted just to bring up, and because I think it was more of a global issue, with respect to, I know a number of subcommittees have brought up prior recommendations, and they are outlined in the report. And I think we have discussed that, our understanding of that is, we are seeing data that further supports prior recommendations, and really we are bringing those up as subcommittees and as a board, just as a reminder of prior recommendations where we have some information that we think is relevant to it. And that's why those are being discussed in the report, versus reiterating them, bringing them up again for further discussion and further vote. I don't think that was the intention. And it seems to me that would be, I would want to stay away from that as a board member, because we don't want to have some prior recommendations deprioritized and send mixed messages about prior recommendations. So in looking at, there are a few where I think subcommittees, we have taken a vote on a prior recommendation, and we can discuss those as we're going through the section, but we may want to be consistent. And just when we're talking about prior recommendations, is just noting them and describing to the extent that we may have some information in this report that's relevant to that. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Board Member Sierra. Any other general thoughts about or suggestions for DOJ? And I'll share one while I'm waiting for hands up. One suggestion that I think is applicable to the whole report is to order ethnicity in the tables and figures in the same order within the report, and then also in the README files that you're going to be publishing. I think that will help people read the data. And so there are a few examples of that where the order is switched. If we could make them the same order, I think that would be helpful. A second recommendation I have is there are parts of the report where we talk about standard deviations, and that's not a particularly easy concept to understand. So for example, on page 10 would be the first time we talk about, comparing data to standard deviations. It might be helpful to add in there like an example of how to read standard deviation. Like if a number equals this, that means that, just to make it a little bit more digestible for the lay public. Board Member Sierra.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because reading that had the same thought, and I was thinking even if we could provide an example, like working with a concrete example, so that the average reader it's not used to working with this type of statistics and data, can better understand it. I think that would be helpful. And I do have one more kind of bigger picture comment, because it isn't about any particular recommendations, but the chapter on POST and our subcommittee's work with respect to the guidelines and training, based on kind of my read through it, and then the subcommittee report with respect to where we are at right now with POST and those guidelines and training, it seems as though there's still a lot in flux. And I think that there are some significant issues that are being unearthed. For example, as Board Member Kulkarni was talking about, that they have outdated law in the guidelines of the training, and that's very concerning. But I think generally that aspect of the report could benefit from maybe tailoring down a bit, and I found it, I wasn't as clear as to what are our main concerns. And so I think that section could use some tightening up. I think it would be more effective, and that maybe really focus on at the end of the day, what is our bottom line concerns about where we're at now. And I do really, encourage all of us that we're continuing to work with POST and really want to have a collaboration with them. I think some of the back and forth, and I know there's been frustration, maybe that, in addition to us having discussions with POST, maybe a letter to POST, but I think maybe we'd want to consider streamlining that section to really just getting to, at the end of the day, what are the problems we see, and then maybe solutions on fixing those. Thank you.
Thank you. We can dive into the sections to keep us moving forward. And so the first section, there's an intro placeholder. And then the report goes right into the stop data section. Are there any suggestions for DOJ on the stop data section?
I'd just like to make two. Oh, thank you. Just two general comments. One, the introduction to the report is so strong, and I really appreciate the focus on youth and the discussion we'll be coming to about recommendations. Given that focus, the report itself, of course, there's so many things to focus on, and it's a large, weighty, meaty report. There's so much to it, and so my comment is very general, but that the more structure we can give in terms of labeling, I know there'll be a table of contents. I know at least in the PDF version I see there's subtabs and subsections, and I just I guess the general comment is the more of that labeling and structure we can do, the easier it'll be for folks to actually reach in and focus on the areas of interest. And although the data section is near and dear to me, I say this knowing that I don't want someone to start in the data section and somehow then not get to these very substantive sections on on youth and policy. And then I echo the comments that were shared already. I really appreciate both in how we refer to past board recommendations and also the language like standard deviation. I don't want us to not include some of that information because that will be useful for some readers, but that there's some commenting that gives people a feel for what that is. So anyway, that's a very overarching comment, that making the report as usable as possible, because there's really so much here, and I really applaud DOJ for the heavy lift that they've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Other suggestions for DOJ in the stop data section? While you're thinking about that, I do have a few suggestions. So the first suggestion is that we repeat or pull up from the policy section a description of why we're looking at 1 to 24 as a definition of youth. As a result of discussions that we had in the policy committee, there is now language included in the policy section about why we're using 1 to 24 as a definition of youth, with some citations, but it's way down, in the report. The report would benefit from up top at the first mention of the focus on 1 to 24, which I believe is on page 17 of the report, that we either repeat or pull that up. So we're real clear on why we're doing that. Second recommendation would be, we have on page 22, we have a figure that is juxtaposing the whether somebody gave consent with the duration of the stop, and we do it just for a particular age group, like a subcategory of youth. It would be helpful, if not in the report, at least in the tables, for that that kind of combined information to exist for all agencies and all age groups and demographics, the way we have it here, but to just be universal in the sharing of that data the way we are with all the other data in the tables. So maybe that's not for the report, but for the tables, that would be very, very helpful to see. I think, we're trying to go from anecdote to data. We're trying to go from what we are hearing in the community to an understanding of how much something is happening. And we've long heard that if somebody doesn't, especially from Black men, if they don't give consent for a search, that they will be subjected to a much longer detention. And we see that playing out in some of the figures that are provided in the report, but it looks like it's not all age groups, it's specific age groups. And so getting an understanding of when it is and when it is not happening in the data would be helpful. And then my third recommendation is that, we're using figures with colors, and I know that there's a new effort to make sure that charts and colors are accessible to people who have disabilities. And so just want to make sure that that DOJ is going to run this report through a disability best practice protocol. I don't know, and that has to do with how it shows up as a PDF digitally. So just want to make sure that that is part of the consideration for how these charts and colors and figures are being put together, that they're readable and accessible. Those are my recommendations for the stop data section. Are there any other recommendations? Board Member Smith. Chauncey Smith, did you have a recommendation?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
Now, I was saying I'm in agreement with the suggestions that were already offered up by the other board members. And then one thing that struck me in looking at the stop data section is the data visual that was selected at the beginning on page 6. So when I think about this undertaking, what we're really trying to get to is the disparities, because that's what indicates profiling, right? And if you look at the bottom of page 5, it provides the proportion of people stopped by different races and ethnicities. Then there's the second paragraph towards the bottom talks about the disparities. And that really goes to the heart of the problem. But then after that paragraph, the data visual is about proportion of people stopped, not comparing them in relationship to their proportion of the population. So if someone just glancing, looking at the data visual, it doesn't really reflect the core of the problem, which is the disparities. Other parts of the report, when you go deeper into it, they do show the disparities when you look at the data visuals. So this struck me as somewhat, the data visual selections struck me as somewhat misplaced here. And the suggestion would be to, I guess, find a different version of the data visual or that reflects the disparities, or pair the current one in the report that has the general proportions with another data visual that reflects the disparities, so that it tells a complete picture and really gets to the heart of where we're trying to go.
Thank you. Board Member Sierra?
Yes, and I think that's a really good point, because I was going through it thinking, oh, we're going to see that later, and maybe at a minimum cross-reference the population charts, because I think that is a really important data set. So there may be a number of ways to achieve this, to make sure that these charts that Board Member Smith is bringing up has the right context. And I also wanted to remind board members, if anybody, unless you're having technical difficulties, if you could be on camera, that would be, we would really prefer that. So thank you so much.
Great. Any other recommendations for this section, the stop data section? Okay, well then we will move on. Just noting that the stop data section does not include any recommendations, so we will not be returning to this in the next part of our agenda after public comment, because there are no recommendations. Okay, moving on to the third section, which is policy. The policy section begins, if you're looking at the PDF, it begins on page 57. And I'll open it up for any suggestions around that content. Give people a minute. We had a robust conversation about this in the policy committee. As part of that committee, I just want to thank other members of that committee for doing the work to get what I think is a pretty solid section into the report. We can narrow in on the recommendations. The policy committee forwarded 4 unanimous recommendations. Those begin on page 138. And why don't we take a look at those and see if there's any questions or suggestions about that language. Page 138. There we go. Yeah, so there were 4 recommendations made. The first was that the legislature should convene a panel of experts to recommend standards, policies, and training for officers as it relates to disparities and research set forth in the 2025 RIPA report with respect to youth, with a focus on use of force, de-escalation, and child development, Members of the panel should include, at a minimum, affected community members, experts in the development of use of force, policies and trainings, child development experts, law enforcement experts, and human rights experts. Any thoughts about that? We worked hard to get to that point in the language, but at the committee level. But if there are any additional thoughts or suggestions, we welcome them. In the second recommendation we made, the legislature should review the efficacy of existing deflection and diversion programs and explore the expansion to universal deflection or diversion for youth accused of a status offense, misdemeanor, or other low-level offense with a rebuttable presumption of eligibility that can be overcome with evidence-based considerations. Again, the committee deliberated quite intensively about this language. We feel good about it, but if there are other recommendations or suggestions, we welcome them. The third recommendation was that the legislature, agencies, and municipalities should explore how limiting officer discretion and stops could reduce racial disparities and make specific findings from their study to act on. This is about inviting people to see the data and the report as the starting point for deeper exploration. And then the fourth recommendation we made was that the board recommend that law enforcement agencies reevaluate proactive policing practices that have a disparate impact and should collaborate with community-based organizations to find alternatives to increase public safety. I think this is an opening to have real deep conversations. I know, we are having them in our region, trying to understand how proactive policing needs are balanced against the interests of community and with public safety in mind. So again, we worked hard to come up with something that we thought would be a good starting point for stakeholders to press forward. If you have any suggestions around that language or that recommendation, those are welcome as well. All right, so I'm hearing that the policy committee did a sound job in its section overall, which I think is true. So let's move on. Let's move on to the next section, which is the post section. And that section begins at page 140. That is a long section. It's about almost 40 pages. Board Member Sierra has already offered a general recommendation that perhaps that language could be tightened up, but seek other recommendations. Board Member Kulkarni.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to second Board Member Sierra's comment as one of the co-chairs of the post subcommittee. I really appreciate that. As you noted, we have had some back and forth and also have expressed some frustration with being able to make some positive advances as it relates to the post workshops, the guidelines, et cetera. But I agree with you that I think we could tighten up this section a bit and perhaps shorten it to make it more clear and concise and really focus on what our recommendations are and then the rationale for those recommendations. So just wanted to second what I heard from our co-chair. And also, while I'm speaking, I did want to just also say ditto to board member Kajavi's comments earlier. I mean, again, all of this data is so important, especially as it pertains to youth. If there are ways more broadly that we can make the report not only more structured, but more user-friendly, perhaps at the end of the conversation today or at our November meeting, I think in addition to the executive summary, there's some particular communications tools that we can use to increase the visibility of this report and its ultimate impacts.
Thank you. Are there any other additional comments or suggestions? I also echo the call for streamlining this section if we can, you know, and ending it with recommendations. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that follows after the recommendations. And I'm not sure what the committee or DOJ's thinking was after around that, but I sort of feel like we should be consistent and end each of these sections with the recommendations. And if that is important content, that be included up above the recommendations to inform the recommendations. There are a lot of recommendations in this section. There are 9 recommendations. There's a 10th that is a restatement of a prior recommendation. So as Angela pointed out, you know, we don't need to spend time in a report restating or revisiting or revoting on a recommendation that says substantially the same thing. That is definitely confusing. So that leaves us with 9 recommendations, which is a lot. And I just wonder whether, you know, whether we need all 9, and perhaps that's just a general thought. I don't want to, yeah, I wasn't a part of this committee, but it felt like a lot in reading it. And before we go to those recommendations, you know, I don't want to curtail any thoughts people have more generally on the section. Okay, then why don't we, if DOJ, if you don't mind, could you pull up the recommendations for post section? And I'm not going to read these all because they're long, but I do want to point them out. They begin on page 175 if you want to follow along. And so the first recommendation that the committee had made is a recommendation that is really a restatement or reiteration of a prior recommendation that I would suggest, and Angela's already suggested, that we don't frame as a recommendation, that rather we do as we've done in the past and just state that we have previously made a recommendation, you know, state what that was, and if we're providing additional context for it or information that informs it, we, you know, that would be the framing for that. You know, across the report, I think that's a good idea. Can we move down to the new recommendations? Okay, so then we have new recommendations, and I will invite you to read these either on your own document or on the screen. This one that's labeled number 2 is about requiring law enforcement agencies to have policies that prohibit profiling and address accountability and consequences for noncompliance. Give people a minute to take a look at that and see if you have any suggestions about that. All right, the second, or the recommendation that's labeled 3 is about more frequent trainings. Board Member Sierra. I think you're on mute.
Thank you. On this one, I just had a comment on our phrase evidence-based training, which is it could be interpreted in a number of ways, and we may want to be, and open this up for discussion, but we may want to be a little bit more direct. And it may be that what we're thinking here is that we would like this tied to RIPA data. That's the evidence, we have evidence data points that the training could benefit from. So I would suggest, as we're thinking about this,
Can I ask, is anyone else having a sound issue?
Yeah, I think Angela
Okay.
might be frozen.
oh boy, am I back?
Oh,
You're
good. Yeah,
back.
you're back. We
Okay.
lost you. Thank you.
I don't know when I got cut off, but I was just thinking that this could benefit from being more direct in indicating that the training should include a reference to the most recent RIPA data.
May I ask a question on that? So I wasn't part of the committee that crafted these, but when I saw the word evidence-based training, I took it to mean training or training providers who are doing a training that's been demonstrated is effective versus that within the training it pointed to particular evidence as a basis for the training. And so I don't know how it was intended, but so naively, I read this as a training that's grounded in what we think are effective training or have been demonstrated to be effective training practices. I see some hands up. I didn't mean to overstep.
Yeah, and we might be able to get some clarity from committee members. I'll start with Board Member Tulis.
Yeah, thank you. And for the Board Member Kajabi, absolutely. That was my concern. And that's why we got the evidence-based in there. The way I recall it is because I didn't want just any group that says, hey, I do training, to start training. And again, it needs to be evidence-based in the sense that RIPA's not evidence-based, regardless. So too, it's statistical, but again, what's it been tested against? And so this is where I want tried and true tested training groups to train police officers, not groups that just say, hey, there's money to be made because local governments have a training budget and this is mandated, so I'm going to get in on the cash cow.
Board Member Kulkarni.
Yeah, I also want to comment on that. I think Board Member Kajabi is that it is more than simply the RIPA data. Sorry, I don't know if I lost you all for a second, but and that we were looking more expansively. I also would welcome anyone who worked with us from the DOJ staff if they also wanted to comment on this.
Is there a member of DOJ staff who would like to provide some insight?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Elliott, and I am a Deputy Attorney General with the Civil Rights Section and working on this section of the report. So the language evidence-based comes from the statute directly. It's in reference to subsection H, which calls for curriculum that is, quote, evidence-based and shall include and examine evidence-based patterns, practices, and protocols that make up racial and identity profiling. And then in the consistent with the report and the content in the post section, it's a call for both measuring the effectiveness of the training and whether there are demonstrable benefits to training and how that reforms officer like behavior or outcomes that we want to see. And then in addition, I think it could be informed and interpreted as being informed by sets of data that reflect and show the practices in California being RIPA data. So it's just meant to be training that is evaluated. So we're not blindly applying training without knowing how it will affect and whether it's successful. And then second, using well-researched and like well-sourced academic data and also research to support the training and its content.
Thank you. Very helpful. Board Member Sierra.
Yes, I just wanted to thank, it was a good discussion, but that is very helpful, you know, as kind of generally, because it's kind of been, we're saying is encompasses both.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments or thoughts on this section before we move on? On this recommendation? That was great clarification. Okay, let's take a look at the recommendation that is identified as number 4, to require law enforcement supervisors and field training officers receive specialized training, ... Any thoughts or suggestions around that? Board Member Sierra?
Okay, I have another one here, just for open to discussion. If there were thoughts about who would this be provided by? Would it be the law enforcement agencies, or would it be post-certified training delivered by post? Or do we, you know, or as I was reading it, you know, we leave it very open, so that is good on one hand for flexibility, but I don't know if it would be better for us to be more specific. And I just don't have, I personally don't have a strong opinion about that either way of who should provide this training, but I thought others on the board may have some insight into that.
Any thoughts or especially comments from the committee? Is do we need to specify? Did you consider whether or not to specify? Any insights you could provide to us or DOJ staff would be great. Go ahead, Danielle.
I see that Board Member Chad Bianco's hand is up. I can just give a briefing really quickly on this recommendation. The reason it's not more specific is because POST generally sets minimum standards, and agencies have the option and often do go above and beyond those requirements to provide more training to their agencies. And agencies are more motivated to take post-certified courses because it is accredited and will go towards certain requirements within the state for their training. And so I think ideally it would be post-certified, but it can be offered either way. And I think that can be something up to the agencies to determine.
Okay. Board Member Bianco?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify about the training. No matter what training it is that we have, our training is all post-certified, whether it's from a private contractor or in-house or from other law enforcement agencies or whoever it is. All of those classes have to be pre-approved and passed by POST. So everything that we have or that we are training would be post-certified.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other thoughts about this language? Board Member Ciara, having heard all that, how are you feeling about this language?
I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
It was very
Board
helpful.
Member, great. Board Member Bianco, did you have something additional? No. Okay. If we could move on, DOJ, if you could scroll down for us, okay, to the recommendation numbered 5 here, requiring post and MOT courses on profiling to be updated every 2 years. Any thoughts or reflections on that? Board Member Ciara.
Yes, I don't think the intent on this was that we were expecting that the full courses would be generally updated, like with workshopping and all that. I think the idea here was that that LEAs would have included the most recent RIPA data and any maybe material changes in legislation. But when we are talking about the end of this phrase and community input, this could be read as kind of requiring posts to kind of do a full workup every 2 years. And I think that is something that we probably want to confer with posts about, like the feasibility of doing a full workup. So my suggestion on this one would just be that that every 2 years there is an update with the most current RIPA data and any material legislative changes. But I'd like to open that up for discussion.
Thank you, Board Member Ciara. And I don't know enough about the process for the existing process for updating these courses. Perhaps DOJ staff could provide us some insight. Is there an existing expectation of a full workup with community input that exists on a particular timeline? I would hate for us to forego community input, but if it exists in another format, another structure, another timeline, that'd be good to know. Board Member Kulkarni, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to provide comment?
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to answer that question and also again welcome Danielle to confirm that yes, it was not our intention that all of it be updated, but as appropriate with that new data, any changes to legislation, etc. And even in the workshop context that we were in last week, I think there was a strong interest in having community member input. So I think this reflects that that will achieve many ends, having community members be a part of these processes. So that was my understanding of this recommendation, but I did want to just have Danielle to speak on this to make sure I'm correct.
Thanks. Danielle?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Board Member Kulkarni. This is consistent with previous RIPA reports and the recommendations that RIPA board members have made and the RIPA board has made after reviewing post and MOT courses. And consistently, we've asked for frequent updates and more consistent and mandatory community engagement. And consistently, post has instead required it to be optional. And RIPA data is still not integrated in any of the racial and identity profiling trainings put on by MOT and certified by post. And so this recommendation is to ensure that that is included in the course content, and it is not meant to be a full workup with the workshops, but rather mandatory, required, updated information for law enforcement officers that can also be incorporated into the the every 5-year 2-hour refresher course that's required. So we're just making sure that all the most recent information is consistent throughout. And I think this also reflects board members' concerns with the 20-year gap between the update of the MOT course, where there wasn't community input for a long time and there was a lot of outdated information and some incorrect descriptions of like racism and a lot of the core features that are elemental to racial and identity profiling. And so by having a mandatory community input, the idea would be to have more eyes on this product, to have more visibility, and again, more accountability for post and the trainings that are distributed throughout the state.
Board Member Sierra?
Yes, thank you. So no, I agree. So right now, as I understand it, then there isn't a current process for updating these courses, and that you've seen some that they're over 10 years or longer that they're being updated.
Post says they update them consistently, but there is no requirement and no visibility into that process.
Okay, and do you know, or do we know how often those updates currently occur?
No.
Okay, so, and have we discussed this with Post about the feasibility of doing these updates every 2 years? Because this would be something very new. And how did we arrive at 2 years? I mean, I don't disagree that these are the guidelines and trainings need to be updated. I'm just wondering if we have yet enough information to say you need to do this every 2 years, and it's going to be pretty substantive.
Initially, the recommendation in the subcommittee was annually, and that is to reflect the annual RIPA data that's recorded in the report. And then the subcommittee voted that that would be too cumbersome for Post and instead decided to include a 2-year requirement.
Okay. And have we heard, or do we know what Post, have they weighed in at all about the frequency?
They have not.
On this? Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, I still think this may be something that we might want to consider, that should engage with Post on this if we want something that's in addition to just providing an update on data or legislation. I think it's a really good idea, but I'm still concerned that, you know, at the end of the day, are they going to be able to do this every 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
And so just, you know, something for us to consider.
Mm-hmm. I think I saw, oh, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, this is Manju Kulkarni again. So, I mean, I think our concern was that, you know, we went from a time, Angela, where the MOT training materials were not updated over 20 years. So, you know, wanting to have guidelines to make sure that materials are updated, you know, and I think it would benefits both Post and MOT to do that. And so given that the RIPA data is, you know, updated on an annual basis, and that we share the information through our reports, we felt that it was appropriate, you know, that every 2 years was not a significant or burdensome, shall I say, burdensome requirement.
I want to give Board Member Randolph an opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. I do believe we have a member from Post on here that I'd like to see if they are able to provide some information. I totally agree on the MOT, the updating. That was, the curriculum was older, but I really wanted to throw it out for the board as we continue to talk about. I noticed we're really hitting it hard on curriculum changes and whatnot. And the assembly members I've spoken to and members of the public I've also spoken to are going to sit here and look at these recommendations. And I have brought it up that members of this board have not went to any police academies, have not sat there and talked to any field training officers on the curriculums. And I do know for a fact, as a police chief, that out of the 41 police academies in the state, they are updating curriculum because it constantly comes through to all of us and what they're doing at Post. So I just want to maintain the credibility of our board that we should go out and fact find on our own instead of relying on what Danielle's doing a great job, but Danielle is up there. She's not in the academies. And that's what we need to do, is go out and do some fact finding before we start doing some massive recommendations on curriculum, because I do believe that the Post staff are really trying to work hard with us on this based on the RIPA information. That was all.
Thank you. We've got a few board members. I saw Board Member Chauncey Smith and then Amina Kazi.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments and suggestions from everyone. I like this recommendation. I appreciate the added insight that that Rich just provided too. I think that added context on from the inside is really helpful for us to consider and I appreciate all the hard work that it seems like Danielle put into this. One thing that comes to mind for me is just the scope of RIPA data. So as currently phrased, it says updated every 2 years of RIPA data, but there's a lot of RIPA data. As we look through this report, there's also appendices, right, that we don't even that are not really at the forefront of what we're reviewing. So just as someone that's kind of following this and that has the time and ability, there's a lot of information to potentially include. So with that in mind, my thought is that it could be helpful to put some broad strokes on what data we're talking about, right? It could be by issue area, right? Or I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to cut the data. So,
right.
And if we're not ready to offer up that suggestion, one reasonable, way to go about it could be to say, in consultation with DOJ. So then DOJ can, once they receive the rec and they try to move forward with it, at least we're also specifying that added clarity could be provided through that collaboration. So it's just not open-ended or something like that.
Thank you for that. Board Member Kazi.
Excuse me. I just like to echo my appreciation for all this work, and I know the DOJ staff as providing that bird's eye view of all this. And I think this particular recommendation, I have a couple comments on. One, I have participated in Sheriff's Academy anti-bias trainings down in Orange County in the past. I did so for several years. So I do have an understanding of what these trainings were like before we had these reports. And so I do think that having these reports and updated data is extremely important. I think that having community input restated in this recommendation is important insofar as the first recommendation might not be adhered to. I think that it is important to maintain that here. And lastly, I just want to point out something that we had a discussion about in our policy subcommittee, which is about these recommendations, and especially these recommendations to the legislature. We are asking the legislature to take on this recommendation, and I anticipate they will do their own level of study and gathering of community input and discussions with Post. And I think that the way that this is worded and offered by the subcommittee for our purposes is completely adequate. So I would be happy moving forward with this recommendation as written.
Thank you, Board Member Kazi. Danielle.
Based on Board Member Randolph and then Board Member Kazi's comments, that is correct. This is a recommendation for the legislature, and Post is working to update trainings and keep consistent. But often when we ask for updates on MOT, they say that it's not the course that they've written and they can't provide updates. They only certify the courses. And so this recommendation is directly intended to require the legislature to consider mandating an MOT update. That's really the basis here. It's not just dedicated or directed towards Post. It's directed toward the legislature to consider and have these conversations with Post and MOT, as Board Member Kazi stated.
So just one suggestion here, because, a lot of issues have been raised around this and the viability of Post being able to do this. And I think we want to make recommendations that are digestible. And so one recommendation would be to say, we recommend the legislature explore legislation that would require Post and MOT courses to be updated every 2 years, because I think there's more work to be done, and it's something that the legislature could take up explore requiring post. Yeah. Board Member Sierra.
I think that would be very helpful because then, also then they would be looking at, maybe they need to provide some additional funding, to
Right.
pair with this. So I would be in favor of that.
Yeah.
This wording.
Okay. Yeah, any final thoughts on this? We're not taking any votes on this right now. We're just discussing to try to streamline our conversation later. If not, we'll move to the recommendation. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I didn't raise, I'm not sure I'm raising my hand properly, but here thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the direction that this recommendation is moving in because there's a clear need we want to have current and updated materials. But to make this language a little more flexible, just maybe RIPA data instead could say RIPA findings. And so it really, or something like that conveys, it's not to just incorporate new numbers every 2 years, but really that the main RIPA findings are somehow reflected and updated. Anyway, so when we come back to this, so in the lines of friendly wordsmithing, that makes it more likely this can really be taken up and successfully implemented by post.
Board Member Kazi? Board Member Kazi, I think I saw your hand. We might have lost you.
Excuse me, I forgot to unmute myself. I wanted to point out that on page 166 of the report, this set of recommendations is under subheading A, which is recommendations to the legislature. And so I feel that, we are clarifying it here, but it is clear in the report when you're scrolling through the report that we have not yet gotten to subsection B, which is the recommendations to post.
Okay, so what you're saying here is we don't need that preliminary language. We could simply state explore.
Yeah. So I mean, this is, and I'm unless I've got this wrong, but my understanding is these recommendations are under subsection A, which is recommendations to the legislature.
Thank you for pointing that out. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right, let's move to the recommendation numbered 6 here, requiring post-certified courses on racial identity profiling to be revised to include ways to prevent behavior that could lead to officer decertification for seriousness of conduct under SB 2. Any thoughts on this one? It appears sound to me. Thank you to the committee for putting this together. Moving on, the recommendation numbered 7 here, amend the law to increase funding and allow for additional stakeholders beyond the MOT to present additional options for the racial identity profiling training to law enforcement officers. Any thoughts here? Okay, let's move on to next one. If you could scroll down, DOJ. All right, require body-worn camera footage when available or highly publicized incidents to be used in training in lieu of stage scenarios. Any thoughts here? Board Member Sierra.
Yes, one suggestion is for us to strike in lieu of, because that could be more prescriptive than we want to be, and it will just be that they require that body-worn camera footage to be used in the training in addition to staged scenarios. Versus in lieu of.
How do people feel about that? Any counter argument to that? Okay. All right, let's move on to the recommendation number 9 here. Fund an independent study under the guidance of RIPA board and conducted by academic researchers that assesses the efficacy of post-racial identity profiling training on officers' attitudes, prejudices, and enforcement outcomes. Any thoughts or reflections on that one? Board Member Sierra.
Yeah, this one too, the term academic researchers could be interpreted as that experts have to be associated with an academic institution. So maybe that's too prescriptive. So I'm not sure we need that.
Okay. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
So perhaps we can get an example of a different kind of researcher then. I'm not sure what she's talking about exactly.
We may have subject matter experts, you know, on police practices that the board would want to work with when assessing the efficacy, or on experts on training that may not be associated with an academic institution. Many may be, but some may not be. So we may want to give ourselves a little more flexibility. So these are subject matter experts.
Okay.
So would it be helpful then to perhaps, instead of taking out academic, add in subject matter experts? And an example of that comes to mind is the Police Executive Research Forum. They're not PERF is not an academic research entity, right? But they are a subject matter expert.
That would work. So we could add that. Academic researchers and other subject matter experts.
That would be a suggestion. Board Member Tulis, did you want to add anything here?
No, I think if we're talking about SMEs, at least I know, you know, where she was going with that, because
Right. You want to,
yeah.
Right. You want to make sure that it's not anyone who's just claiming to be a researcher.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, great. And I see Board Member Kulkarni, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. And that is actually my concern. If we're to make it open to simply anyone who fulfills the category of subject matter expert, they're not subject to peer review standards. They're not subject to other sort of requirements that are typically held and followed by academic researchers. And so then it loses, I would say, both, you know, the standardization that is often required or almost always required when academic researchers, you know, provide their evidence. And so given that, again, just want to share that, you know, we in the post subcommittee have seen, you know, the materials that have been provided by MOT and others lack that standardization, lack evidence-based data and research, and using things that just really are very concerning in this area. I would say that you know, this is the reason that we have said academic researchers. I will, you know, share with you that, you know, when we looked at the MOT training, for example, there were the discussion of even race was subpar and would not be something that would be used, say, by academics in the field. And so that's why we really wanted to hold this up to a standard that we would all be proud of, rather than one that could be used by anyone who puts out their shingle as a subject matter expert, which really can be anybody.
I'm not sure that it can be anybody, and if there's a board member or DOJ that wants to chime in. I mean, maybe there's a qualifier, but for example, Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, you know, is widely regarded and recognized across the United States, does this sort of work, right? But they are not academic. So I think I share Chief Tulise's concern that we and Board Member Sierra's concern that, you know, we don't want to be too narrow, but we want to make sure that we're getting legitimate folks to do the work, right? So is there I don't know
Well,
if
I
subject
think I
matter
would
expert
want,
is a term of art that has its own meaning, or if we can put in a qualifying word so that it's broader than academic.
well, I think in that case, I would like to see a qualifying word, because I think, as I've seen it, subject matter expert is been used very, very broadly, and you know, are not necessarily people who are using peer review standards or others, IRBs and other things that are more typical among academic researchers.
We've got some hands up. Maybe somebody has a suggestion here. In order, I'll take them. Board Member Sierra and then Tulise.
Yes, just briefly, since this is under our guidance, the study, you know, and we're saying it's an independent study, but it's under the guidance of the RIPA board, my assumption is that we would be selecting who would be conducting this research. So if we maybe could add a caveat, conducted by academic researchers and other subject matter experts, you know, selected by the RIPA board or identified by the RIPA board. Maybe that resolves the issue that board member Kulkarni is bringing up. I mean, I just had assumed that we would have that type of control.
Okay. Board Member Tulise.
Yeah, I don't think that helps. And I'll tell you why. I think we want to know the truth. At the end of the day, don't we just want to get to the bottom, get the truth of what's going on? So us selecting it by the vote, that I know how the votes go on this board, isn't going to get us what we're trying to do. So I think if we had something that says, you know, an academic researcher from X, you know, that identifies the peer support that Kulkarni would like. But and then the other part, when it talks about the subject matter expert, it could be the subject matter expert identified by either post or court recognized expert in the matter. You know, it shouldn't be us saying, oh, they're an expert. That's because that's not really what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, which is why I asked if you know, if there's a definition, if this is a term of art as opposed to a self-identified category. I wonder if we just added in you know, and other recognized, put in the word recognized subject matter experts, if that gets at what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, because the wording of experts identified by this board, you know, that's you know, that's a no-go for me, because most people on this board aren't qualified to identify an expert in the profiling, attitudes, prejudices, etc.
Okay, so
I mean, with respect, of course.
Yeah,
I don't think that's why people were selected for this board.
Yes, you know, we may come at it from different perspectives, but I agree with you that we don't have the expertise to figure that out. But I think if we take out the identified by the RIPA board and leave in just and other recognized subject matter experts, that in the implementation of this recommendation, that would get worked out. That would be my recommendation. Any additional thoughts or suggestions about this? Board Member Kulkarni.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say I continue to have reservations about that because having sat in on the training last week, you know, a number of us were identified as subject matter experts, and yet I'm not sure that everyone who was there as a subject matter expert would be able to do an independent study that would be peer reviewed, that would have meet the other qualifications of a study that we would want that would have legitimacy. I don't think there are any definitions, as I understand it, by Post of what makes a subject matter expert. So without any definitions, I'd have some very, concerns about putting in language that has no definition.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative would be qualified. I don't know that we need to, like, this is our recommendation to the legislature, right? So that this isn't the thing, it's just the recommendation. So that might get worked out in an implementation if they pick this up. Any additional thoughts, Board Member Kazi?
Yeah, I just want to echo Board Member Kulkarni's concerns. You know, within the American Muslim community, we've just suffered under, a cottage industry of so-called experts who understood, being Muslim and how it relates to radicalism and, how it may lead to terrorism. Self-defined experts and it just created this so-called reinforcing wheel of people who would recognize other people. And this industry just blew up in the, 2009, 2010. And it took a lot of deconstructing. And I really wonder how much we are watering down our proposals to just reinvent the wheel that hasn't worked before. And so I do want to caution against that. And I do think the wording as the stated academic researchers, it does its justice. There's enough people within that field to be able to select from to get this done, and we're not limiting it to even California. So I would recommend just keep it staying with the language that was proposed.
Thank you. That is compelling, and maybe we're doing more work here than we need to do. And so I would agree with you on that. Angela, you were the one that originally brought this up. Board Member Sierra.
And I do. I think those points very well taken. And I really appreciate this discussion. And I think now I'll become full circle and I start going with the original language, given the variety of issues that have been brought up.
Great. Okay. So I think we've gone all around on that one. Let's move on to the recommendation number 10. Provide funding and require Post to report annually on specific training outcome and performance measures. Post should consider looking at implicit bias metrics before and after the trainings to evaluate its effectiveness. Any thoughts on this one? And I see Board Member Sierra, I don't know if this is a new hand or an old hand.
That was an old hand. Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, seeing no comments on this one. That's it for the Post recommendations. Sorry, these are recommendations. The above were recommendations to the legislature. These are recommendations to Post. And so there are a few of these. The first is evaluate the academic research underpinning trainings during its course certification process. Any thoughts on this one? Okay, let's move on to the next recommendation. revise the process for evaluating law enforcement training, ... Any thoughts on this one? All right, let's move on to the last one here, and that's to formally evaluate LD3 and LD42. I think these refer to learning components in the regular basic course comprehensive module tests. And I assume these are spelled out somewhere in the report, but if they're not, we should spell them out for the public. Any thoughts on this suggestion? Okay, all right. Well, that takes us through post. The next section in the report is complaints. It starts at page 178. Any general comments or suggestions or specific suggestions on the complaint text before we get to the recommendations, which start at page 190? If not, we can go to the complaints recommendations, starting on page 190. And if DOJ, if you could pull those up on the screen, that would be helpful. I think we have two sets of recommendations, one around youth and one around accountability and SB2. And so this first set is around youth, and starting with 1, the recommendation is that the legislature amend Penal Code